Good evening, everyone. It's very late at night here on Sunday night, April 20th. I want to thank you for taking the opportunity to watch this and just check in on to see how I'm doing. It's been a while since I've put out a post on my knee surgeries and recoveries. And the reason for that, there simply hasn't been a whole lot to report. The last several weeks have been very much the same, related to taking some medications on a daily basis, waiting for the infection control to take hold, make sure that nothing's getting worse or redeveloping. And then this last week, we've kind of made some headway in a lot of those areas. So I want to talk just a little bit about where we are right now and where we're headed in the next several weeks. Just to quickly review, at some point following my initial knee replacement surgery, which occurred on that day after Christmas, my knee became infected. Late in the evening on Wednesday, February 26th, I had a second surgery to address that infection. I expected that second surgery to last approximately 30 minutes while the knee was reopened and flushed with antibiotics. However, upon opening the knee, my doctor observed a significant amount of internal tissue damage, which required between 2 and 2.5 hours of work. He was able to repair the damaged tissues and inserted something similar to a skin graft to repair a hole that had appeared in the joint capsule. When the surgery was complete, the incision on my knee was held together by 30 staples and it was bandaged up. He placed my leg in an immobilizer brace to allow the skin repairs to heal. I was kept in the hospital while tissue samples taken from my knee were analyzed to determine what bacteria had caused the infection. By late Saturday night or early Sunday morning sometime, the bacteria responsible for my infection had been narrowed down sufficiently that I could be released from the hospital. I was allowed to go home around 3 o'clock on that Sunday afternoon. At my dismissal from the hospital, there were three aspects of my recovery. First, the tissue repairs needed to heal properly. Second, the infection needed to be monitored and controlled so that it would not return. And third, and finally, mobility of the knee had to be restored, just as I had faced with the initial surgery way back in December. As far as the healing of the tissue repairs was concerned, my orthopedic doctor kept me in that immobilizer brace for 4 weeks. This gave those repairs made to the soft tissue time to heal sufficiently before being subjected to motion that might be associated with physical therapy or any type of regaining of movement. The bandage that covered the surgical incision site remained on my knee until I visited his office on Friday, March 14. On that Friday, I went into his office to have the staff change out the bandaging that was put in place at the surgery. That was the first time I had an opportunity to see the actual incision in my knee. Without going into specific details, I will simply say that what I saw when the bandage was removed was pretty shocking. I'm not sure what I was expecting to see, but seeing those 30 staples used to close the incision line and a significant area of angry-looking scabs next to the incision line was a lot for me to take in. In those moments, I was again grateful to have my personal RN, Robin, at my side, as always, reassuring me. The appearance of the surgery sites, while disconcerting to me, were normal, given the significant damage the infection had caused and the extensive repair work the doctor had completed. My knee simply needed more time to heal, inside and out. I returned the following Tuesday, March 18th, and saw my orthopedic. This was my first visit with him since leaving the hospital. When the bandage came off this time, while there was still a lot of healing that needed to be done, I was genuinely amazed how much better everything looked than what I had seen the previous Friday. Furthermore, since I had a better expectation of what I was going to be looking at under the bandage, it was not quite as shocking this time. What did surprise me was that he said we would remove the staples. I remember thinking, there is no way these staples are ready to come out. However, out they came, and it only took about 5 minutes to accomplish that. He did tell me to remain in the immobilizing brace and that he would see me again in a week. When I returned to his office on the following Tuesday, March 25th, he continued to be positive about how the wound was progressing. It still looked pretty strange to me, but he said everything was fine. He took me out of the immobilizer brace and put me into an adjustable hinged brace. He limited the amount of flexion to 20 degrees and wrote me an order to begin physical therapy. I couldn't believe it. That PT order was so exciting because it signaled the completion of that first aspect of post-surgical recovery. After 28 days post-surgery, the tissue repair had now healed sufficiently, and I could start to work out on restoring movement of the knee. More on that in just a few minutes. During those 4 weeks of waiting for the tissue repairs to heal, we were also working on infection control. I am under the care of an infection control doctor who took on my case at the hospital and is managing that process. The main purpose of the surgery was to flush out the knee and remove all toxic bacteria that may have been present. Following that clean out, extensive follow-up remains necessary to ensure that all of those bad bugs were removed and that infection does not reappear. As I mentioned previously, tissue samples were collected during the surgery and sent to the lab to see what would grow from those specimens. While waiting for the results of those tests, I was prescribed a couple of broad-spectrum antibiotics. These were administered while I was still in the hospital, first through my IV and then through a PICC line that was inserted in my upper left arm on Friday while I was still at the hospital. Late Friday or early Saturday, the bacteria culprits finally grew and became recognizable. They were sufficiently narrowed down, allowing me to be dismissed from the hospital. I was directed by my infection doctor to visit his office on that next day, Monday, to receive a week's worth of medications, as well as training on how to infuse those medications myself at home. On the Monday after I was released from the hospital, Robin and I visited the infection doctor's office and received 2 antibiotic medications and all the necessary supplies for administering those via the infusion line in my arm. The infusion nurse was really awesome, giving me clear instructions on how to complete this process. After 2 or 3 days, under the careful and watchful supervision of Robin, I felt very comfortable with the process and was able to complete all of those steps by myself. This process of administering medications at home would continue 6 weeks, at which time the doctor would reevaluate my progress. Each Monday, we returned to his office, picked up the next week's supply of medications, drew a sample of blood, and had the bandaging on the PICC line changed out. On week 3, which was March 17th, spring break, we received some really good news in that the bacteria had fully manifested itself and been identified as simply MRSA. I say simply because it's not just a simple thing, but at least that was the only thing we were fighting. This meant that I could drop one of those 2 medications and administer only one, which called daptomycin, each day. The daily infusions of this single medication continued all the way until my follow-up appointment on Thursday, April 10th. Arriving at this appointment, we were very hopeful that I would be able to be taken off the infusion medication and have my PICC line removed. Having a PICC line in your arm is extremely inconvenient, as you are not permitted to stretch your arm out, raise your arm up above the shoulder level, because this can negatively impact the placement of that PICC line, resulting in a trip to the ER. Literally, the afternoon of the appointment, one of the still scabbing sites located off the incision line had become slightly inflamed. When the doctor pushed on the scab, a small amount of pus oozed out from the site. This concerned him. He said we would keep the meds in place for another week, and he directed me to go see my orthopedic doctor immediately. This was extremely disappointing news, and we went that afternoon to talk to my orthopedic. Thankfully, he was not concerned about that situation. He informed us that the oozing of the fluid was simply a normal wound drainage and that the sites were continuing to heal as he expected. He also reviewed my blood work from the past several weeks and reported that key indicators continued to move in a positive direction, indicating that no infection was present. This was extremely good news and provided significant relief to what I had just heard a bit earlier from the infection doctor. Fast forward to Thursday of this past week, April 17th, we returned to visit the infection doctor again. We reported what the orthopedic had said, and the infection doctor released me mercifully from the infusion process, and I was able to have my PICC line removed that afternoon. He transitioned me to oral antibiotics, directing me to return for another appointment in 4 weeks to discuss the next steps. I am definitely glad to have regained the use of my left arm, and I definitely prefer the oral version of those medications. So that's the current status of aspect number 2 of my recovery. I'm still taking those oral antibiotics and will do so for the next 3.5 weeks, but all indicators point to my status as it relates to the infection, that it is moving in a positive direction. Now let's talk about the third aspect of my recovery really quickly: regaining motion and movement in the knee joint. You may recall from previous visits, reclaiming motion should begin immediately following surgery to avoid the limiting effects related to buildup of scar tissue. In this second surgery, unfortunately, I was required to keep the knee immobilized for 4 weeks. That was necessary to let the tissues heal. However, it was completely working against regaining motion, as during that 4 weeks, scar tissue developed, just as it would be expected. When my ortho doc wrote my PT orders on March 25th, I had 2 sessions that week and then have had 3 sessions in each of the previous 2 weeks. While strength and endurance are progressing as I would hope, gains in the range of motion continue to be elusive. This last Friday, I measured 65 degrees of knee flexion. After my first surgery back in December, I was at 90 degrees after about 2 weeks. So I'm well short of where I was after 2 weeks originally. You may remember in the first surgery go-round, my original orthopedic doctor was not happy with my range of motion progress at the 6-week mark. At 7 weeks, he performed a knee manipulation, which broke up the existing scar tissue and jump-started that range of motion process again. I don't know if a manipulation is going to be required this time around or not. My current orthopedic said that I have about 4 more weeks before we have to make that decision. So 4 weeks to see if my range of motion will increase sufficiently or if we're going to need to do that second manipulation. So I've got a little bit of time to improve, and we'll see how that progresses. So that's where I am. That's my current status. Superficial healing to the incision line, and one of the sites located off of that incision line is still a work in progress, but the surgical repairs to the internal soft tissues have healed. Healing of those tissues occurs from the inside out, so that external visible areas will be the last ones to fully heal. The infection appears to be under control. We're continuing to monitor that. And finally, we are at least able to start addressing the range of motion in the knee. I'm not where I want to be if I were in a perfect world as far as that goes, but we're going to be working on that intensely over the next few weeks. It's been a while since my last update, but until this past week, very little had been happening, as I mentioned. My targets for regaining use of my knee remain unchanged in spite of all that has transpired, and the next few weeks are going to determine how far I'm going to be able to make it. As always, I'm very grateful for your support and your continued interest. Thank you for listening and watching this video, and we'll be in touch again soon. Bye bye now.